Angeles Clippers. I think this is an important game. I don't think it's critical, but it's an important game because games on the road, I really think play a part in how we should interpret the Los Angeles Clippers. What's the whole point of a team like the Clippers having a good record and maybe even having home field advantage in the first round when one of the bigger problems for the Clippers is that they don't know how to take care of business on the road against teams that really, from a talent perspective, they should be better than them. So this is the part now where they really need to start kind of finding their rhythm and finding their groove. If you're the Indiana Pacers, this is just an important game altogether to really figure out what this team is going to look like and is made of. Not in comparison to, what they're going to have to deal with in the Eastern Conference, but just, in general, because I think we had this conversation when we had the great Caitlin Cooper on giving us the masterclass regarding the Pacers. There's just a lot of moving parts to this team, unknown parts to this team. And this is a good litmus test when you're playing against a very talented team like the Los Angeles Clippers to see, how these guys can fare up and match up. Can they become men? You know what I'm saying? Because right now they look like boys in the throes of what they're supposed to be doing this season. So these are some, interesting storylines that when you have this type of matchup that probably doesn't get discussed because people are just really looking on the surface at records and, playoffs. But I'm just looking at this, from a competitive long-term perspective with both of these teams. And that's, to me, what stands out when you see this type of game being played and why the game is really being close, because the Pacers are hanging in there with the team that is expected to actually beat them, regardless, if they're not 100%.
Well, it's interesting because as you alluded to, the Clippers have been a little bit inconsistent. They're struggling with some injuries, but the Pacers have been struggling with injuries all season long, right? And that's when you talked about Caitlin Cooper coming on the show. She's used to it as somebody who covers this team on a regular basis, but a lot of people are kind of desensitized to the Pacers' plight in a lot of ways and don't realize they haven't had T.J. Warren most of the season, and they had to trade Oladipo, then got LeVert. LeVert had to deal with the kidney issue and now is back and seems to be rounding into form. As we speak, live and breathe right now, Miles Turner is out too, right? So the Pacers team has really, really been up against it. Somehow they won 6 of their last 10 and, are on a little bit of mini-game winning streak here and are at home and are doing a decent job against this Clippers team that is also, like I said, struggling with some injuries. Pat Beverly out for, I think next 4 to 6 weeks as well. So I do agree. This is a nice litmus test, but it's interesting because I do think the Clippers they started off hot, then kind of faded a little bit, had some injuries, and Paul George and Kawhi back and forth, so forth and so forth, and are kind of now just there. And them just being there, we're still them being third in the Western Conference right now, right? So, it's not a bad spot to be. It's just, but like for us, if people who follow the game and watch this, like we really just want to see them do it. And I think a win against this Pacers team, who's playing relatively well right now, would be nice on the road, but it is a tight one. Our man Matt has joined us as well as against it. And yeah, we do have a good game. So a little bit shocked, didn't think it would be maybe as tight as it was, but hey, let's go ahead and enjoy this ride. So going through some of the particulars of this game, I want to discuss, my guy, Sabonis. And even going back to when we featured the Pacers on the baseline a couple of weeks ago, just the incessant usage that Sabonis has, and you see it in this game. And he actually expects to touch the ball almost on every single possession for them. Caitlin didn't think it was a sustainable model, for the future. It's kind of just what they have to do right now this year, especially while they're shorthanded. But he's not smooth. Sabonis is anything but that. He's a bull in a china shop, but it's a guy who has to touch the ball on a regular basis. Do you think versus a Clippers team that is supposed to be
like father, like son?
Yeah, but versus Clippers team that is supposed to be one of the higher level defensive teams out there, can a guy like Sabonis really thrive in this game? He's got, I think it was 12 points. I think I saw a little bit ago. Don't have the box score up in front of me, but this Clippers team shouldn't really allow him to kind of bully ball them. But here, we're watching the highlight package right now, and he's driving and bully balling his way to the rim and like that as well too. So, what do you think what do you think the Clippers can do to make sure that Sabonis doesn't have a great impact on this game?
All right. Well, before I get that part of the question, the reason why I basically had indicated that there is a like father, like son thing is because Shaw, I don't know if you remember this, but this is how the Portland Trailblazers kind of used his father, Arvydas Sabonis. This family, the Sabonis family, they are skilled basketball people, man. You want to call it genetic, whatever. They know how to ball. But that doesn't mean that you're so awe of the skills that you practically are, running the talent to the ground, which is what we were fearful of. And I think even to what Caitlin Cooper was kind of saying when she says that this probably is not sustainable, that is the end result of this. It's kind of pushing out this false belief that you want to use him for each and every conceivable thing when the most effective thing is to put him in the best position possible to be effective. So with that being said, if you're the Los Angeles Clippers, use the strategy that Bjorken is against him, right? Force Sabonis to buy into the hype that he has to be involved in everything, to the point where he's not going to be effective in the fourth quarter, to the point where he's not going to, not be as sharp as what he's looked like so far in the first 3 quarters of the game. Expend him on the defensive side of the ball a lot, even if his matchup is not going to be the one, scoring that shot. I mean, that's the whole idea here is forcing the Pacers to actually think about what they're doing to Sabonis for this game, and when you start focusing on one person, what happens to the Brogdons? What happens to the Leverts? You know what I'm saying? Like, those guys now need shots to, to get into a groove, to find rhythm. They're not, they're not like the players that we see where, like Steph Curry, where he could, not touch the ball for like almost a quarter and a half. And then when you actually need them, they'll be able to hit shots. These guys, they need a rhythm. They need something to be in there on their side in order for them to feel like they can get that ball in the basket. And if you're going to keep doing it through one person, I guarantee you that the other 4 guys on the floor are going to be left stranded on an island, and then will be, you will not be able to depend on them when it matters most. And a game is this close, I think you want to collectively have everybody working the ball, a lot of ball movement. And if Sabonis is available, let him take the shot. But when not, the other guys have got to be ready to go. But this, again, to the point, it's not sustainable. And I think the Clippers should use that to their advantage, use it against the Pacers.
I think one thing, too, that we kind of overlook in talking about Sabonis's overall usage is, people don't really, from what I see, that they don't challenge him defensively. Like, they don't involve him in a lot of pick and rolls or trying to make sure that he's involved in moving his feet and having to switch on to maybe guards and things of that nature. Now, I think the Clippers could potentially do that if they run some Paul George pick and rolls right now. No Kawhi tonight, so they don't have that ability to do that. PG's doing a nice job of kind of maintaining and handling himself here a little bit. But ultimately, you would feel like, okay, get Sabonis involved, defensively, and make him have to potentially tire himself out, especially because of the heavy load he plays when it comes to the minutes and things of that nature. So I like to see Ty Lue, make sure that Sabonis is involved in all of the actions that the Clippers are running to get him moving and maybe even get him into foul trouble defensively. But right now, like I said, it's, still nip and tuck, 79-77. So go ahead.
Before you go on to that, I don't know if you just noticed a few moments ago, but in a couple of the offensive sets, you can clearly see the Sabonis is he's asking for the ball. You know what I'm saying? He clips.
He's always like,
yeah. He clips on the pick and is already immediately asking for the ball as he's cutting to the basket. And again, look, when you're a super player, right? When you're a superstar player, right? I understand. Like, be mad because that ball should have been given to you because you're at your spot. But we're not talking about that with Sabonis. You see, and like, he's gonna basically go and try and take a shot himself because he's recognizing that they're not giving him the ball when he actually needs the ball. Again, this is not a recipe for success if you're the Indiana Pacers. And I think at some point it's going to come to a head. In a game like this, if the Pacers still hang with the Clippers and they lose the game due to a couple of shots that are really, I don't want to use the word egregious, but bad decision shots, and they come from Sabonis, you best believe that when they go back into the locker room, he's going to get called out for that. He's gonna get called on as ish for that. And I think part of that is going to be on Sabonis. Definitely a big part of it is going to be on the way that the Pacers have enveloped this offensive system that seems to just everything has to go through Sabonis, but is not putting him in the best position to be as successful a player as he's supposed to be.
Well, I mean, and again, I think that successful is for the Indiana Pacers is making the playoffs and having a good run. I don't know what the statistical numbers should be for Sabonis and the exact amount of minutes that he should be playing, so to speak, but they need him and they're using the hell out of him right now. And I agree where you'd like to have a little bit more versatility on the roster. And I think that's what Caris LeVert is supposed to bring. But he hasn't really just kind of broken loose in the way that he did, obviously, in the bubble with Brooklyn being extremely shorthanded when he was there. And then even how he started off this season, as a sixth man in Brooklyn. So again, little by little, as he just hits a mid-range jumper here as we're talking, but that's the guy who they want to start to get involved in the action and their offense. He and Brogdon really should be high level and high usage guys, I think, in their offense on a regular basis. But for right now, it is Sabonis. So, but Pacers are again on a little bit of a run right now, so it's kind of hard to knock them when they're playing well.
Can I say something at you real quick? And I don't want to come off conspiracy theorist, okay? So, but I gotta ask this question. Do you think that the Indiana Pacers were so gung-ho about getting Caris LeVert because they wanted to replicate what they were getting from TJ Warren? I mean, I asked this question because, I feel like I'm throwing this out there. I feel like Caris LeVert, in his own right, is kind of like that TJ Warren type player. Like, he's finding his groove right now, how great he can be in the NBA. College prospect type, that really it struggled because he wasn't getting minutes and he wasn't getting playing time. And now, he found himself when he was when he was playing in Brooklyn, then injuries caught him. Same thing with TJ Warren. I mean, so that's the reason why I'm throwing out that question.
I mean, I think it's a fair question. When you look at the Pacers roster, the talent isn't like overwhelming. And I use the word sexy a lot. It's not like these super athletic, boom on you type guys or whatever. And LeVert and Warren have some similarities in terms of like the level of excitement they can bring to the game, but they're both high level scorers. I think, even Warren has proven to become that, especially in his latter years of Phoenix and then his first few years in Indiana, minus the injuries. But LeVert's play creation is a lot better than TJ Warren's is, like a lot better. The rebounding to me is probably about equal, to that. And I think the difference is, again, LeVert maybe a little bit younger, and again, just has a little bit more bounce, a little bit more wiggle, but they're very similar. And I think they give you very similar things, for Indiana's overall offense and appeal. And I think that's what makes this roster kind of, I don't want to say flat, not in the way that like it's a flat soda, you know what I mean? But it's just like they don't have a whole lot of versatility to the way they can play, I think, at times. And that's where you'd hope maybe some of their younger guys like Aaron Holiday would come in and maybe do something. But as we know, he's buried on the bench, and Sumner has usurped him, in their rotation. Guys like Doug McDermott, you know what I mean? Like, it's all just kind of even keel guys, and they all come together to do the job, so to speak. But it's a little bit, I think, underwhelming when you look at them down the hallway and you're matching them up against, some of the upper echelon teams in the Eastern Conference. You don't get it. You don't get excited about it in the end, despite them being a good, solid team that's pretty well coached and it's going to defend at a decent level as well too. But they're just kind of, and that's where I think I get my comparisons lie with TJ Warren and Caris LeVert. They're both good players, but do they really move the needle for you?
Well, and so, but I asked that question as more so of how we're reviewing and assessing Pacers management and the decision making of what's driving them to make the deals that they're making, right? So to your point, when you look at this team, there's no sex appeal to this team. They're really more or less, I guess you could say, like a blue collar team with people that maybe in a year from now you're going to be sitting here saying, hey, do they represent the rejects? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that to say that they suck. I'm saying that, if they don't become successful playing for the Indiana Pacers, do you see them being successful being put to other basketball teams that already have, players and talent that have filled in those roles in those positions, right? You don't know if whether or not any of these guys are going to usurp some of the other starting roster players for other teams in the Eastern Conference. Let's forget even the Western Conference. So that to me is kind of where I was when I brought that question to your attention, Shaw, because if you're the Indiana Pacers, this no longer should be getting a roster to try people out. And you should not be trying to get players that almost replicate exactly what you already have. If you believe in TJ Warren, it isn't as if TJ Warren's injuries are that of something that's career threatening. You have to believe at some point TJ Warren is going to be healthy and he's going to be productive. And if you believe in that TJ Warren, then you need to make sure that you are putting an offense out there that's going to allow him to continue to get bigger and better. I don't know how having a guy like Caris LeVert on this roster is supposed to help you get towards doing that. And if you don't have a versatile coach, meaning not to take anything from Nate here, but if he doesn't have the offensive innovativeness to figure out a way to utilize these guys simultaneously or, individually, whether it's, team A and team B, whatever the case may be, then this team is running in circles. And I wouldn't have to compare them to the rest of the upper echelon of the Eastern Conference. I'm saying, how long is it going to be before they wind up being the lower third of the Eastern Conference picture or one of the play-in teams? Or forget that. They're probably one season removed from them being another lottery team. And that to me is the problem that I have with some of the assets that they do have. When you have talent like a Sabonis, like a Brogdon, you got to make sure that whoever it is that you're adding to the roster is elevating them to step up their game. And I don't see how getting a guy like Caris LeVert is pushing them to that direction.
Well, I'll say one thing to your point. I think what you said right now is probably the exact reason why Houston did not acquire Caris LeVert when they, probably could have, and opted to go the Oladipo route to potentially try to flip him again. See how that ended up working out. I think LeVert would have been a better asset to have, even if you didn't want to keep him. But nevertheless, that was probably part of their, their decision-making process, where they may not be as high on him. And there's some in the league who are extremely high on LeVert's overall ability.
I would have definitely loved to have seen LeVert and Wood paired up together.
Yeah, I think it would have been a better move, but
happened at the time to Wood. But I'm just saying, seeing what Wood was giving you, and you have John Wall and you have Caris LeVert, that is a nice young driven combination that you could, if you're a Houston Rockets fan, after going through what you went through, that is something that you can actually come to the arena and at least feel excited about seeing on a nightly basis.
Yeah. I mean, again, that's why they didn't do it. They didn't feel that way, and I think when it comes to Indiana, they feel like, well, if we're going to lose Oladipo anyway, and he doesn't really want to be here, and we can get a chance to get LeVert, then that's a great get. And I think there's still a lot of potential for him, but as we were both saying, again, this roster is just kind of, like I said, it's okay. Right now they are, ninth or 10th in the Eastern Conference. So they are play-in tournament worthy. Could they upset somebody? Like I said, they're playing well-ish right now. And giving the Clippers all they can handle right now, only down 4 here in the third quarter. But it's tough, but we all know with this team in this market, they're not a free agent destination, so they're never going to be in the hunt for the Durants and LeBrons and people like that when they become available. So they do what they do to try to build a certain level of consistency, acquire enough overall talent that kind of permeates throughout the roster, even if it is a little bit flat, as I alluded to, and that's how they make their bacon. Now, we don't have to like it, and we don't have to think that it's championship worthy, but I really think they're doing the best they can do, unless they can somehow hit on a draft pick, whether it be a lottery pick, late first round, second round, whatever it is, and then somebody comes in and kind of surprises them with the overall talent. But that just hasn't really been the case for them in a long time. And I mean, with the exception of the Brogdon signing a couple of years ago, which was basically a steal, away from Milwaukee, they make their moves via trades.
Listen, I completely agree with you. I will say this, though. The Indiana Pacers, at least from my perspective, the Indiana Pacers have figured out a way to get in their own way. In other words, you draft a kid like Aaron Holiday, but then you go ahead and you sign Malcolm Brogdon. You understand what I'm saying? Like, and you brought this up, and we had discussed this. To me, it's to your point. I don't think we would be questioning the draft selections that Indiana has made over the last few years if they have actually put emphasis on coaching up the players that they've drafted. But somehow they have figured out a way to undercut the potential of what their talent should give them because they are actually trying to do something that we've said for years. The Indiana Pacers are not the type of team to go crazy balling out and using the free agency as a means to place that organization, to place that team in the upper echelon of competing in the Eastern Conference. That's never been their MO, right? Name a time during our generation when the Indiana Pacers has actually executed that and has done it well. We say the same thing with teams like the New York Knicks. We've said that with the Boston Celtics until they figured out and got the picture. This comes back to, can Danny Ainge call the talent, like find the talent in the draft? You get all of these draft picks. Are you drafting quality players, star players? So back to the same thing here. You know, if you're a small market team like the Indiana Pacers, and for years you've been acknowledged as the better years have been the years and where you found that guy who represents the franchise, plays his ass off, and gives the free agents, not the upper echelon top tier dudes, but gives the free agents that you know will come out here and bust their ass for you. That gives that Pacers team a window for them to compete. And they've had a couple of years to do that, especially under Nate McMillan being their head coach. And time again, we've seen the Pacers get in their own way. And so to bring this full circle with regards to this game specifically, what we're seeing here is the erosion, right? The eventual erosion of the Pacers, relevancy in the Eastern Conference, which then means guys like TJ Warren, guys like Karis LeVert, Sabonis, and maybe even Brogdon become collateral damage. They become wasted talent because they're not positioned to do what you brought them in here to do, what you've given Brogdon the money to do, right? They're not going to be able to do that because this team is not structured to compete in that kind of way. You know, that's the disappointing part.
As the third quarter is going to come to a close, let's just had to Google it right quick, and I was interested to kind of see the Pacers draft picks in recent years. So this year or last year, whatever, Cassius Stanley, Goga Bitadze, Jarrell Brantley, Aaron Holiday, Alize Johnson, who just signed a multi-year deal in Brooklyn because now he's playing well, so maybe it took him a couple years to develop, but they didn't have the time. TJ Leaf, also no longer on the team.
Cassius Stanley playing for another team as well too.
I'm sorry?
Isn't Cassius Stanley playing for another team as well too?
No, he was in the dunk contest. Yeah, no. He doesn't play at all. He just
okay.
They actually drafted LeVert in 2016, so that had to be a trade deal with Brooklyn at that time. Niang, who's in Utah now, I believe. Miles Turner, Joseph Young, Louis Labierier. Sorry, Louis, don't know the last name. Apologies there. Solo Solomon Hill, who's been around the league multiple times. We're all the way back in 2013 right now. Colton Iverson, remember that guy? Mm-hmm. Miles Plumlee, Kawhi Leonard. They traded him for George Hill with the Spurs. So Davis Bertans way back in 2011. I didn't realize Davis Bertans was that old. So, and then obviously Paul George in 2010, Lance Stevenson in 2010. So the last draft pick they hit on and kept was Paul George. And he was part of some of those great Pacer teams. With Danny Granger back in the day. That's a throwback for you, for sure, for some of us viewing here today, when those Pacers teams were actually trying to challenge those Miami Heat, LeBron, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh teams. But they haven't had a lot of great luck in the draft. They haven't also drafted extremely high. It looks like, quick look here, Turner at 11 was their highest pick. And that's because they're usually pretty good, or if they made it some trades, or they, like I said, they do just enough to kind of stay relevant. So drafting is not their forte. And I think that's that goes without saying. So
it doesn't have,
before we continue here, we're going to take a break. Go ahead.
It doesn't have to be their forte, but it isn't as if they haven't had cracks at getting it right. How about that? Can we at least agree on that? It hasn't been that they've not. You only have to hit on one, but it does kind of look a little bad if you ain't hitting on any of them, because that's just not where you're prioritizing how you're trying to build a team.
Well, I mean, imagine if it would have kept, Kawhi, and a lot of people wondered that a lot. If Kawhi would have became Kawhi if he didn't go to San Antonio and work in that system, could the Pacers at that time cultivated him to be what he's become? And I don't know, but we'll answer that question here after we take a quick break and resume for the fourth quarter. We'll be right back here on the Baseline Live. Indiana Pacers, LA Clippers. Clippers, Pacers, 102-97. Just over 11 left to play. Quarter opens with Paul George hitting yet another one. Clippers looking real good right now, getting a lot of great offensive contribution. Marcus Morris has 20-plus points. Rondo just giving a nice dime to Batum on a dunk. If you are live with me on the Hot Mic feed, 104-97 Clippers Pacers right now. Cal, we spent a lot of time in the majority of that last quarter talking about the Pacers and, where we think they are and what they're ultimately going to do. Let's focus a little bit on the Clippers and just we touched on them a little bit, and then we kind of got sidetracked talking, going into a deep dive of Indiana. But what do you think about this Clippers roster right now? I mean, again, Morris doing a nice job contributing. They've got a great contribution out of, one of their bench guys here, Terrence Mann. He's played well for them at times and put up some decent numbers. Just what do you think about this team as currently constructed? I know you gave some thoughts earlier on, but this will do a little bit of a deeper dive into their roster and some of maybe even the role players outside of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard.
Well, I think the Clippers have done a pretty good job of filling in the gap that they obviously had left when they lost Harrell. They gave away Williams. But I think ultimately you realize that something was probably going to have to change for this team. And even if it's going to be dependent on how far George and Kawhi Leonard takes them, they definitely needed able bodies. I don't know if they're able enough to help them in the playoffs. I think that's going to be what the bigger question is going to be. The Reggie Jacksons, the Nicholas Batum, Marcus Morris's. This is most of the emphasis is going to be on how great George and Leonard are going to be, but I really think the emphasis is going to be is what kind of contributions is the rest of the roster going to give you. And we're not going to know that until they actually get there to the playoffs. I will say this. The news that Jamal Murray is now out for the rest of the season over, that ACL, I think is a much bigger blow. And the reason why I bring this up is how it pertains to the Los Angeles Clippers is not because of the fact that it was the Nuggets that knocked the Clippers off in the 7-game series last season, but it's more so another team that has to get through the pain and the anguish of not being 100% going into the playoffs. Like, regardless of what the record reflects for the Denver Nuggets, do you honestly think that without Jamal Murray, even if Jokic is having an MVP-like kind of season, that they're going to get far, coming out of the West? Absolutely not. And if you're the Los Angeles Clippers and you see all of these upper echelon teams dropping like flies because of injury, I mean, this conference is and you said it a few times, ripe for the pick. So if you're the Clippers, what is it going to take for you to finally put yourself in your first Eastern Conference Finals? And I think a lot of this is going to come down to the handful of games that are remaining, where if you're Tyronn Lue, you really need to see who is going to be key components that is going to ride with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard to get them to the promised land. Because it ain't going to be just those two. All right. We've seen, if things aren't perfect, right, for this team having Leonard and George, then they're going to have some kind of backup plan. And the backup plan is, do they have a deep enough roster? Do they have a versatile enough roster where all of these guys are going to be able to contribute and really elevate this Clippers team to be taken seriously to make that run?
What I'm concerned about for them is, as you alluded to, is almost Pacer-like in some ways. Like, after you get past Kawhi and PG, who on the roster truly impresses you? And I think right now it's interesting because statistically they're damn good. They had for their first in offensive rating this year, 118, 10th in defense. So they're really good offensively, and they're getting good looks. And then when you add a guy like Ron to help make the play creation a little bit easier for some of those guys, and that's extremely important. They're first in 3-point percentage. The Clippers are. But who on that team strikes you as like a knockdown shooter? But there they are. And I mean, they are actually 5th in 3-point makes, and maybe that's because they shoot such a high percentage. So they're getting it done, but it's funny when you look at the roster, you're just kind of like, well, who's doing it? And yes, Paul George and Kawhi are shooting very well from the 3-point line themselves, and they had Lou Williams for a while as well too. But the Batums, the Kennards, the Morrises, the Jacksons, the Mans, even Ibaka, when he gets back, all those parts need to play well, and they have done that in the regular season thus far. But it is a little bit surprising because I think you wouldn't look at this Clippers roster just outside of Paul George and Kawhi and say, okay, well, that's the number one offense in the NBA. Oh, that's the best 3-point shooting team in the NBA. Like, you just wouldn't do it. But somehow Ty Lue has cultivated an offense that gets it done, where guys like Terrence Mann, as we're talking right now, just hits a corner 3 off some nice ball action. It's the way that they're running their offense and moving the ball and trusting one another that's getting these guys some good looks right now, despite not having, our word here tonight, the sexiest of names throughout the depth of the roster.
Well, let me also put something out here, and I didn't mention this name because you don't have to mention the name, but I think, to me, what may be the most important move that the Los Angeles Clippers made is writing what they didn't do in the offseason initially by figuring out a way to get Rajon Rondo on their team. Having him on this team, I think, is going to be so critical, right? Like, I'm just saying, if you're going to tell me after Patrick Beverley and after Reggie Jackson, you're resting your hopes on getting the rest of these guys set up to succeed in critical stretches on playoff runs, I'm sorry. You better hope that Kawhi Leonard, is the cyborg, like Terminator, Dark Fate, right? Like, I don't know how many more versions of the Terminator you're going to need to have Kawhi Leonard play at that level. PG-13 is going to have to be like PG NC 13, right? And R13, like non-rated. Like, he's going to have to be off the grid with everything that he does. And I don't know how you conceivably will do that, because the matchups, while they often should play to the advantage of the Clippers with that kind of two-guard combination, right, where versatility-wise, Leonard and George can play both the two, can play the three, can match up small, can match up big defensively and offensively. On the flip side, they have been prone to be susceptible to playing against lengthier teams that are bigger than them, right? We saw that with the Denver Nuggets, So my thing is, you have a guy like Rajon Rondo who can be a mismatch problem at the point guard position. Now you have expanded, the opportunity if you're the Clippers, and you don't need Rajon Rondo scoring. You just need Rondo putting guys in the right position to succeed when your starting point guard Patrick Beverley isn't on the floor. So that to me is where I think it really matters most. And I think we've seen this a couple of times already with Rondo being on the floor, that he has put guys in a position with his dribble drive penetration, hits one guy who's going to obviously kick it to the open man, and then you see a guy like Terrence Mann getting an open look three. That just doesn't happen with the Patrick Beverley and Reggie Jackson all the time. And to me, that's the type of stuff that's going to help the Clippers if they, when they get to the playoffs.
Again, like I said, I think one of the things, and our guy Matt here again told you he's our underdog from TNT, bro. Especially he's coming through with the stats. Yeah, I don't think the 3-point shooting is sustainable, and getting Rondo is pretty good. It would have, almost exactly like you said, probably would have been better if they were able to get Rondo offseason. That way they wouldn't have had to offload Lou Williams. Or if they still try to do that, maybe they upgrade another area, especially maybe at that big man. So I don't believe, let me check the box score here tonight. I don't think Cousins has touched the floor. So yeah, no.
They're gonna wait until Game 4 will probably be a first series sweep for the Clippers. They'll wait till Game 4 to put DeMarcus Cousins on the floor. They're like, we want to make sure that you're able to at least be healthy on the floor if we make it all the way to the championship, because I feel bad for Boogie Cousins. Boogie Cousins has not been able to sniff the playoffs without sustaining some kind of an injury. And I would be afraid. I mean, it's great to have him, Well,
he's got, 2 days left on his 10-day right now, so no indication of whether or not they're going to pick that up. They haven't really used him ad nauseum. I think he played – I saw the first game. I don't remember really seeing much from him after that, But like I said, going back to the earlier point, Lou Williams would have been somebody that they shouldn't have had to trade to get Rajon Rondo. They could, like you said, if they would have got Rondo in the offseason, then Williams maybe fills a different need for them going into this. And this season is played out kind of funny. They've still had kind of a pseudo redemption in some ways, but you, I, and all of the rest of the media, we're kind of just like, all right, let's wait till the playoffs. We're not impressed, even with 118, offensive rating, even with them shooting over 40% from the 3-point line and leading the league in that. We're just not impressed. And
who else we say that? You know who else we say that to as well too? The Utah Jazz, right? So again, this is the reason why I think it's great that we're on a platform like Hot Mic, because we don't want to spend our time having these mind-numbing conversations that really can only be looked at in a funnel, so to speak. It can only be funneled into this one little particular game. We're just talking about what this really should mean when you see this game on primetime television, right? This is more than just the ratings. It's about what exactly is it that you're presenting to us to make the argument or make the case actually that you're a team that really is going to be taken seriously when playoff time comes, right? Because the running joke has always been that the Los Angeles Clippers can never get to a Western Conference Finals, right? The Los Angeles Clippers, with all of their flash, all of their swag, it really means nothing because they're not showing it when it really matters the most.
Yeah.
So that's what kind of jumps out more than anything when I see a game like this, because you're expecting, or I'm expecting, hey, this is a talented team. They should basically be winning by 10 points. All right, they're not using Kawhi and Paul George, to such a whatever. They should be a more talented basketball team than the Indiana Pacers.
So,
but then now you have to start saying, is this more about the Pacers playing up to the level, or is this the Clippers playing down to the level? And you remember, this is the same time around last season, we were saying how much stock you put in the fact that this team was struggling to figure out how to turn this thing on, right? Before the pandemic. And it wasn't like the time off during the pandemic when the NBA decided to start the season that we said, all right, let's just wait and see what this Clippers team does in the first games in the bubble. And you could clearly tell this wasn't just about these guys are rusty. And no, there clearly is a chemistry problem. They're not on the same page. And I think in some degree, a little overhyped.
Well, they've been a lot more humble this year, with the exception of some Paul George whatevers. He's always got to have some media gaps here and there. But as we live and breathe, as I keep saying tonight, now they've opened up the lead 120 to 106, 20-9 run here to open the fourth quarter. Looks like they're putting this one away here and doing exactly what we would have hoped them to do against an inferior Pacers team.
Do you think that the path to the Clippers getting to the finals is going to be offensively or defensively for them?
I mean, defense, as they say, wins championships. But I don't trust anyone outside of Paul George and Kawhi. And historically, we have enough of a sample size here. Paul George shits the bed at some point in the playoffs. So Kawhi won't be able to do it by himself. So who is the third guy who comes off the bench or who's in the starting lineup who gives them the requisite boost? If Ibaka comes back and is healthy, can you give them 15, hitting roughly 4 threes, and maybe a couple free throws and doing some rebounding on a night where maybe you're not expecting it and Paul George is down? Can Terrence Mann give you what he's been giving you in the playoffs? And to me, a lot of these guys who they are going to rely on this year are unproven. Reggie Jackson is very much maligned. Nobody wants to see Reggie Jackson, but can he redeem himself somewhat? So to me, I honestly think it is going to be offensively, because I think they have enough defensive chops and principles to stay in games, but it's just when the going gets tough, who's going to kind of nut up and not produce. And if they can find some level of consistency outside of Kawhi and Paul George, then you can trust them. But I don't know who that is. Like, I don't look at this team and say, all right, that guy. Is it Morris? Is it Kennard? Is it Ibaka? Is it Batum? Jackson? I don't know. And that's what makes me
I just find it interesting that a lot of the guys that are on this team are guys that we're hoping offensively are going to be able to find their shining moment, right? Like, find their Kawhi moment. I mean, you can make the argument that while Paul George has been impressive throughout his years, he's never had his Kawhi moment. He's had Kawhi chances, and he's never showed up to them. You can trail this all the way back to when he was playing in the Indiana Pacers and he had to deal with LeBron James, right? And so I say this because sometimes it's not about the numbers. It's about what's happening in the matchups. When Paul George was being matched up with LeBron James, the focus was more about whether or not Paul George could stop LeBron James, because at that time, Paul George was considered one of the best two-way players in the game, right? Or is emerging as one of the best two-way players in the game. But his calling card was what he was doing defensively, right? And then now his offensive game started emerging. So what happens now to his defensive game? And we did the same thing with Kawhi Leonard, right? Like, the key to the Toronto Raptors winning that championship, if you looked at the numbers statistically, it was literally Kawhi Leonard exploding and kicking that team on putting that team on his back and scoring critical points when the rest of the team basically couldn't, until finally the rest of the team caught up with Kawhi Leonard and bailed out Kawhi Leonard in the finals against the Golden State Warriors. You know what I'm saying? All of these guys on the Los Angeles Clippers, Nicholas Batum, Marcus Morris, okay, Zubac, George, all of them, they have had an opportunity to do what they do best, but they're being asked to do what they don't often do consistently. So it's going to be interesting to see when all of these players find their quote unquote offensive okay? And in the end, will that be enough to get them where the Clippers have never been? Because I kind of still believe that if they don't figure out that part of why they are good was because they could lock down certain players at certain times, I don't think it's going to matter what you're going to ask from these Clippers to give you offensively. You know what I'm saying? The running joke was that the Clippers should have been walking themselves into the Western Conference Finals when they allowed the Denver Nuggets to run roughshod offensively on that defense. You know what I'm saying? That to me is the thing that stands out more than anyone can talk about how Kawhi Leonard and Paul George wet the bed in that Game 7. That was doomsday for them going back 2 games prior to that because they should have locked down the Denver Nuggets defensively and they couldn't do it. And that's speaking to where they are mentally as far as what the team is supposed to look like and how they're supposed to, kind of represent themselves. So that is what I think stands out when I think about the Clippers going into this season. I'm impressed that their offensive rating is as high and they're shooting the 3 ball. But I'm saying if I don't see the defensive efforts that has made everyone talk about the Clippers the way that we were talking about when you brought them on, when you brought Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, we were saying this could probably be one of the best defensive teams in NBA history, right? Simply because of the calling card that both of those guys bring, the cachet that they bring to the table. You don't see any of that. You know what I'm saying? You don't. And so that to me is where I feel like it's really going to come out when you look at the kind of matchups that they're going to be dealing with.
Sure.
The Phoenix Suns, Utah Jazz, you know what I'm saying? The Los Angeles Lakers when they're fully healthy, maybe even the Golden State Warriors. I mean, that's where I'm at with it. And I know that's not what gets talked about quite often when we speak about this Clippers team in that respect.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, and to our guy Matt's point, he's like they got rid of defensive liabilities in Trez and Lou Williams, and I think if you replace that with Batum and even Rondo to a lesser degree, especially Rondo, while he's maybe not doing a lot of the defensive stops himself, he's communicating. And that goes a long way on a defense. So when this team got together last year, you talked about exactly Paul George and Kawhi, lockdown, wing defenders, switchable, etc. Pat Beverly, another guy who's able to kind of guard point guards and maybe even guard all the way up to threes and not be afraid in terms of getting into them. And that really should have been what they relied upon heavily in that Nuggets series, in the bubble. And, a lot of wheels just fell off. They were just not mentally tough. They didn't have the level of cohesion. We saw the big story about Kawhi and, whether or not his kind of superstar prima donna attitude maybe weighed on some of the guys last year. But all that, you're not hearing any about that this year. And I think they are a little bit better suited defensively, especially because they do have a guy like Batum to even give Kawhi or Paul George a break. And while Batum is not, locked down anymore, he's still, a competent guy who has a lot of length and kind of knows what to do. So I think with the communication, some of the schemes that Ty Lue was now also putting into play. Obviously the addition of Baca is huge too for the overall rim protection that Zubac isn't just not on the floor, at crunch time a lot of times. Like he's not on the floor right now in a 9-point game, 2 minutes left. I believe maybe foolishly, I have more faith in their defense because to me, defense is easier to play. Like it's easier to buy into because to me, a lot of times defense is effort, where offense a lot of times is actually the skill level of this team. And that's where I'm not convinced with them offensively. I think they have a better chance to get some stops defensively as opposed to hitting game-winning shots offensively when it comes to the playoffs. But we'll see, right? We'll definitely see.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. But, to your point, though, Shaw, the Los Angeles Clippers arguably can be one of the most versatilely dangerous defensive teams in this decade. Yeah. They could be. But I just don't think mentally they're there for that. And let's put it like this. You brought up an excellent point with regards to, them getting Serge Ibaka. I don't think that they realize potentially how important Serge Ibaka really will be to this team if, to make this eventual playoff run, right? And we're not going to see that presented to us in a game like tonight. I think you'll have to see this over the course of the next few games and the way that Tyronn Lue is going to implement and use. But remember there are times when we were talking about Serge Ibaka back when he was with the Oklahoma City Thunder and he was a part of that trifecta of Westbrook, Harden, and Durant. We were like, man, where's Serge Ibaka in the party, right? Like he just basically he was the forgotten one, right? But you could actually make the argument that Serge Ibaka defensively really sustained and stabilized 3 young superstars from being ostracized for being as great as they were already being, but not being as defensively heady as they could have been, right? Like I think he really helped them. He took the brunt because everyone expected him to be the ball stopper, the rim protector, and everything like that. But then when they really needed shots, he couldn't make those shots, right? And everyone's just like, well, Serge Ibaka, I don't know why you still got this guy. The guy can't make shots. He shouldn't be in the fourth quarter, this, that, and the third. Look, let's fast forward to what he was doing for the Toronto Raptors and then now what he should be doing for the Los Angeles Clippers, what he could potentially do for the Los Angeles Clippers.
You're just going to skip over his Orlando days? Like that didn't happen?
I'm just, listen, that was a stopgap. There was a stopgap there. I'm just saying that Serge Ibaka can really play a critical role defensively, to your point. Guys like him and Rondo are communicators, and guys like them are going to help to remind the Clippers when their offense isn't clicking, they need stops, right? They need stops. They need rebounds. They need outlets. They need transition. And it'll be interesting because this Clippers team is not a great transition basketball team. I mean, they're talented, but they ain't outrunning too many other teams, especially in the Western Conference. But I think part of what's going to make them successful is their ability to get out in transition, which can be enabled by what they do defensively. And that, to me, is what I think will stand out more than anything about the litmus test of how successful the Clippers can really be this season. Like, what kind of run do we expect them to make?
Well, this one's kind of getting away. We have just under a minute left. Clippers have a 13-point lead. Paul George, revenge game here in Indiana, dropping 36, 8 assists, 7 rebounds, 2 steals, got 5 turnovers, but shooting 4 of 7 again. Hellacious rate from the 3-point line. Marcus Morris, I don't know, did he score in the second half? 22 points, 3 of 3 from the 3-point line. So, it's really interesting here. Again, the revenge game angle never seems to fail. The Pacers get another strong effort out of Sabonis, 20 and 13, another double-double. I think he's second in the league in double-doubles this year. LeVert actually had 24, 6 and 6, 25, 6 and 6, excuse me. Malcolm Brogdon, 29, 5 and 4, but just not enough defense from their side of the basketball to stop a very, very hot Paul George and the Clippers team that really put things away here in the fourth quarter. It was a decent game, but Clippers just kind of, took control here in the fourth and answered some questions here on the road. So it's exciting that this roster, and you said on our podcast, the most interesting matchup where the NBA could definitely keep your attention would be if the Clippers ended up playing the Lakers in the first round, of the playoffs. Does that still hold true from when we discussed that roughly a week ago?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know people want to have this, fairy tale thought process about, this, if these guys were to, look as good as how they've looked, especially during this part of the year right now, like, and they're positioning themselves to probably be, third best, maybe even second best or whatever, when it's all said and done. My whole thing is stop trying to ask for the potential final and let's get down to the business. I think there's enough parity right now in the NBA that any matchup, if you have to question it, then you're not really following the NBA. You're really not. I don't want to wait for the Clippers and the Lakers. I've said this time and time again. until the Clippers and the Lakers are actually playing for something, like they're taking something away from each other, there is no rivalry between these two teams. There really isn't. The Lakers have got another chip. The Clippers continue to get egg on their face. You know what I'm saying? So at some point, something's got to give. And if maybe it takes the first round matchup where the Clippers come in as about 100% as they possibly can, and the Lakers come in about 100% as possibly can, that is prime ripe that if something were to go down, we're questioning the Los Angeles Lakers, hey, could this be the end? Because now the Clippers have gotten over the proverbial hump, so to speak. Or will the Lakers actually put a beat down on the Clippers and be like, we sunning you once again, right? We're sunning you. You didn't even need to show up. You know what I'm saying? You didn't even need to be a part of this because you were never about this. This part of the season, you guys ain't about it. Y'all could have just basically been happy with being the third best team in the Western Conference in the regular season because you got no business playing with the big boys when it comes to being in the playoffs. That's what that could potentially be.
I would love it.
And I like to see.
Yeah, I'd love it. I fear we're not gonna get it though. You know, I just these damn Lakers, man. They've kind of righted the ship a little bit without LeBron and AD. Kind of playing extremely good defense. You know, Vogel's doing a great job with that, and I don't think we're gonna see a 4-5 with that. It's possible. And I don't think the Lakers are going to finish sixth, especially with the Nuggets having that injury to Jamal Murray now. So I don't know, but I would. There's something about there's an allure to that I'm very intrigued in. Like both those teams having to play in the first round for all the marbles. While a lot of people would say, well, you know, you want to save the best conference matchup for your conference finals if you really think those are the two best teams that could potentially win an NBA championship. You know, I like, you know, the chaos, you know, of Utah and Phoenix stepping into the party here and feeling like they can do something that maybe they shouldn't. You know, if Portland can stay healthy, you know, can they get into the conversation, maybe surprise some teams as well, too. So I don't know, man. We'll end up seeing, but we're going to go ahead and close this one out here. 126, 115, just 14 seconds left in this one. So it's all but done. We want to thank everybody for joining us here for another Hot Mic, the Baseline Live. Make sure you stay tuned to us every Tuesday night, usually second half of the game. So hopefully we'll get a good one like we had for the most part here in the second half of this one. And we'll see you all next week. All right. Catch you later, everybody.